Imagine Elara, beaming in her wedding dress, sharing a cherished father-daughter dance, only for him to whisper, "Thanks for paying my debts. The house is your sister's now." What happens next will leave you stunned. You have to hear this betrayal unfold.
Thanks for the platform, Eliza. This story's been bottled up too long, but sharing it feels empowering. It's my chance to show how standing up changed everything. Let's dive in. My name is Elara, and I need to tell you about the day my wedding became my liberation. At 27, I thought I understood family loyalty. I thought sacrifice meant something. I thought being the good daughter would eventually pay off. I was wrong about everything except one thing: sometimes the truth has to be spoken, even if it destroys everything you thought you wanted. Growing up in the States, I was always the responsible one. My family had moved around a bit when I was younger. Dad's construction work took us from coast to coast, but we'd settled in suburban Portland when I was 15. While my younger sister Chloe painted abstract masterpieces and declared herself too sensitive for the mundane world. I studied accounting, got my CPA, and landed a solid job at a mid-sized firm. My light brown hair was always neatly braided. My blue eyes focused on spreadsheets and solutions, and my warm, infectious smile smoothed over every family crisis. That smile got a lot of practice 5 years ago when Dad's construction business went belly up. The 2008 recession had created ripple effects that finally caught up with him in 2019, and the dominoes fell fast. Unpaid invoices, defaulted loans, and a mountain of debt that threatened to swallow our childhood home, the Victorian-era house on Elm Street, where Chloe still lived, painting in the converted garage studio Dad had built for her 18th birthday. I remember the family meeting like it was yesterday. We sat around the dining room table where we'd shared thousands of meals, and Dad laid out the numbers with the defeated air of a man watching his life's work crumble. $120,000. That's what stood between our family and financial ruin. "The bank's going to foreclose," he said, his voice hollow, "unless we can come up with the money." Mom twisted her wedding ring, a nervous habit she'd developed since Dad's business started failing. Chloe sat with tears streaming down her face, already mourning the loss of her studio. And me, I looked at those numbers and started calculating. "I can help," I heard myself say. The words came out before I'd fully processed the magnitude of what I was offering. Dad's eyes lit up with desperate hope. "Elara, honey, that's incredibly generous, but..." "I've been saving for a house anyway," I continued, the lie coming easily because it felt like it should have been true. "Mark and I aren't getting married for a few years yet. I can take out a loan against my 401k, use my savings, pick up extra clients." What I didn't say was that Mark, my boyfriend of 2 years, had been hinting about proposals and talking about our future with increasing frequency. What I didn't say was that my savings account was my security blanket, my escape fund, my proof that I could take care of myself. What I didn't say was that $120,000 represented the European honeymoon I'd dreamed of since college, the down payment on a home where Mark and I could start our family, the financial cushion that would let me take maternity leave someday without stress. "But what do you get out of it?" Chloe asked, and for a moment I thought she was going to object to my sacrifice. Dad cleared his throat. "Well, obviously, once the debts are cleared and we can keep the house, it would only be fair." He looked at me meaningfully. "The house would be yours, Elara, legally. It's worth about $200,000, so you'd actually be making an investment." The Victorian on Elm Street. 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, original hardwood floors, and a kitchen I'd helped Mom renovate when I was 16. It was more than an investment. It was home. It was the place where Mark and I could start our marriage, where our children could grow up, where I'd finally have something solid and permanent in a world that felt increasingly unstable. That's actually perfect," I said, and my smile was genuine for the first time since we'd sat down. "Mark and I have been talking about buying something together anyway." So the deal was struck. The family home agreement, Dad called it, and he even had a lawyer draft up papers making it official. I would pay off his debts over the next 5 years, and the house would be transferred to my name once the final payment was made. It was a business arrangement dressed up as family love, but it felt fair. It felt like I was finally going to get something tangible for all those years of being the responsible one. The next 5 years were a masterclass in financial discipline and emotional endurance. I moved into a studio apartment that was barely larger than Chloe's walk-in closet. I took on freelance accounting work in the evenings and weekends. I drove my Honda Civic until it literally wouldn't start anymore, then bought another used car with cash. I packed lunches, skipped vacations, and said no to every social event that cost more than $20. The sacrifices went deeper than money. When my college friends planned a reunion trip to Europe, I had to decline. When Mark suggested we take a long weekend in Napa for our anniversary, I countered with a camping trip instead. When my best friend Jessica got married and asked me to be her maid of honor, I had to explain why I couldn't afford the bachelorette party in Vegas. Every no felt like another piece of my social life crumbling away, but I told myself it was temporary. I was investing in our future. Mark was incredible through all of it. He never once complained when I had to cancel dinner plans because I was working late on a client's books. He never made me feel guilty for choosing a hiking date over an expensive restaurant. When he proposed on a beach in Oregon at sunset, the ring was modest but perfect, a simple solitaire that caught the light like my eyes when I said yes. "I know this isn't easy," he said as we planned our wedding on a tight budget, "but I'm proud of you for helping your family. That's the kind of person I want to marry." Meanwhile, Chloe's artistic career was flourishing in the way that artistic careers do when someone else is paying the bills. She had gallery showings, sold a few pieces, and spent most of her time networking with other artists and traveling to find inspiration. She lived in the house rent-free, using the savings on her part-time barista job to fund her art supplies and weekend trips to Seattle and San Francisco. "I'm so grateful you're doing this," she told me over coffee one Saturday morning. "I know I could never handle the stress of all those numbers and deadlines. You're so much stronger than me." I smiled and squeezed her hand. That's what family does for each other. But sometimes, late at night when I was working on tax returns for my freelance clients, I'd wonder if strength was just another word for being taken advantage of. I'd wonder what my life would look like if I'd said no, if I'd let the house go and used that money to build something just for Mark and me. I'd think about the children we were delaying because we couldn't afford a bigger place, the dreams we were postponing because every spare dollar went to Dad's debt. Those thoughts always made me feel guilty, though. Family came first. That's what Dad had taught me since I was little. "We take care of our own," he'd say whenever news stories came on about families torn apart by money or success. "Blood is thicker than water, and loyalty is everything." By the time our wedding date approached, I'd paid off the full $120,000 of Dad's debt. Every last penny, plus interest, plus the legal fees for the house transfer. The papers were already drawn up, just waiting for the wedding to be over to make the transfer official. Dad had insisted on waiting until after the ceremony to make it feel like a proper wedding gift. I felt lighter than I had in years. The finish line was crossed, and beyond it lay everything I'd been working toward: a home with Mark, financial stability, and the satisfaction of knowing I'd saved my family without losing myself in the process. I should have known it was too good to be true. September 15th dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of golden light that photographers dream about. Our venue was a restored barn in the countryside outside Portland, surrounded by rolling hills and oak trees just beginning to turn autumn colors. Mark and I had chosen it because it felt like us, unpretentious, beautiful in a natural way, and affordable enough that we could invite everyone we wanted without going into debt. We'd kept our expenses under $25,000 by choosing DIY decorations, a local caterer instead of a fancy hotel, and asking Jessica's photographer friend to shoot the wedding as our gift. Every decision had been carefully budgeted, every expense weighed against our future plans for the Victorian house. I woke up in the bridal suite at 6 a.m., my stomach fluttering with excitement rather than nerves. My maid of honor, Jessica, was already up, arranging the wildflowers we'd picked the day before. She'd been my college roommate and closest friend for nearly a decade, and she knew better than anyone what this day meant to me. "Today's the day you get everything you've worked for," she said, handing me a cup of coffee. "The man, the house, the fresh start." I nodded, running my fingers through my hair before Jessica started braiding it. We'd decided on a loose bohemian style, woven through with tiny white wildflowers that matched the arrangements throughout the venue. It felt romantic and natural, like the kind of bride who'd grown up in that Victorian house and was now ready to fill it with her own family. "I keep thinking about the house," I told Jessica as she worked. "About how Mark and I will paint the nursery in that back bedroom, how we'll host Christmas dinners in the dining room, how our kids will play in the same backyard where I learned to ride a bike." Jessica smiled in the mirror. "It's going to be perfect. You've earned this." The morning flew by in a blur of makeup, photographs, and last-minute adjustments. My dress was ivory silk with delicate lace sleeves and a flowing skirt that moved like water when I walked. It had been my one splurge. I'd found it at a sample sale and fell in love with how it made me feel both elegant and comfortable. "You look perfect," Mom said when she came to see me before the ceremony. Her eyes were bright with tears, and she squeezed my hands carefully to avoid smudging my nail polish. "Your father is so proud of you. We both are." "Thanks, Mom," I squeezed back, my blue eyes sparkling with happiness. "I feel perfect. I feel like everything is finally coming together." Jessica clipped a tiny wireless microphone to the inside of my dress bodice. "For the wedding video," she explained. "This way we'll capture every word of your vows, every sweet moment. You'll want to remember everything." The ceremony itself was everything I'd dreamed of. Our 150 guests filled the wooden chairs we'd rented, creating an intimate yet celebratory atmosphere. Mark looked devastatingly handsome in his navy suit, his eyes never leaving mine as I walked down the aisle. Dad's arm was steady under mine, and he whispered, "You're beautiful, sweetheart," as he handed me over to my future husband. Our vows were personal but not overly sentimental. We promised to support each other's dreams, to communicate honestly, and to build a life based on mutual respect and shared values. When Mark slipped the wedding band onto my finger, I felt a surge of pure joy. This was it, the moment when all my sacrifice and patience finally paid off. The cocktail hour was perfect. Guests mingled on the lawn, sipping local wine and eating appetizers from the caterer we'd splurged on after tasting their incredible salmon cakes. I floated from group to group, my warm, infectious smile never faltering as I accepted congratulations and compliments. "You two are going to be so happy in that house," my Aunt Carol said, pulling me into a hug. "I remember when your parents first bought it. It's perfect for starting a family." "I can't wait," I replied honestly. "We're going to move in next month, right after the honeymoon." Everything was going according to plan. The photographer was capturing beautiful moments. The DJ was reading the crowd perfectly, and even Chloe seemed to be enjoying herself instead of sulking about having to wear a bridesmaid dress in boring navy blue. But then came the toasts, and the first crack appeared in my perfect day. Dinner was served family-style at long wooden tables decorated with mason jars full of wildflowers. The food was delicious: herb-crusted chicken, roasted vegetables from local farms, and fresh bread that filled the barn with the most incredible aroma. Mark and I sat at the head table with our wedding party, and I felt like I was glowing from the inside out. Then Dad stood up with his champagne glass, and the room fell quiet. I expected a heartfelt speech about watching me grow up, about how proud he was of the woman I'd become, maybe even a subtle acknowledgement of how I'd helped the family through tough times. Instead, he spoke for less than a minute about me. "Elara has always been our sensible girl," he said, his voice carrying easily through the microphone. "She's got a good head on her shoulders and a generous heart. Mark, you're getting a wife who knows how to work hard and take care of the people she loves. I wish you both all the happiness in the world." That was it, 30 seconds about the bride, and then he pivoted. "I also want to take a moment to talk about my younger daughter, Chloe." His voice warmed noticeably, taking on the proud, indulgent tone I'd heard him use about her art since she was in high school. "Chloe is our free spirit, our artist. She sees the world in ways that constantly amaze me. I'm thrilled to announce that she's been accepted into an exclusive artistic residency program. She's going to dedicate herself fully to her craft, and I know she's going to do incredible things." He went on for 3 more minutes about Chloe's artistic vision, her recent gallery showing, and her plans to take her talent to the next level. The room listened politely, but I could see confusion on some faces. This was supposed to be about the bride and groom, not a promotional speech for my sister's art career. What stung most was the glaring omission. Not once had Dad mentioned my sacrifice. Not once had he acknowledged what I'd given up to save our family home. Not once had he even hinted at the 5 years I'd spent working myself to exhaustion to pay his debts. It was as if my contribution was so expected and insignificant that it didn't warrant a single sentence. When he finally sat down, Mark leaned over and whispered, "That was interesting." I forced my smile to stay in place, but something cold had settled in my stomach. "He's just not good with public speaking," I murmured to Mark, but the excuse felt hollow even as I said it. Jessica, sitting on my other side, reached over and squeezed my hand. She'd been there through all 5 years of my financial struggle, and she'd seen how much this day meant to me. "Some people just don't know how to express gratitude," she said quietly. But it wasn't about gratitude, I realized. It was about recognition. About being seen as something more than just the reliable daughter who could be counted on to handle the ugly, necessary things while everyone else pursued their dreams. I shook off the feeling and focused on enjoying the rest of dinner. This was my wedding day, and I wasn't going to let one awkward toast ruin it. There would be time to talk to Dad later, to address the hurt feelings and clear the air. For now, I just wanted to celebrate. The DJ announced that it was time for the special dances, and my heart lifted again. The father-daughter dance was a tradition I'd been looking forward to since I was a little girl. Dad and I had always had a special relationship. I was his responsible one, his helper, the daughter he could count on for anything. He'd chosen My Girl by The Temptations, the song he used to sing to me when I was little. I remembered dancing on his feet in the living room of the Victorian house, giggling as he spun me around and called me his sunshine. Just last week during our rehearsal dinner, he'd gotten teary-eyed talking about how much this dance meant to him. "I've been practicing," he'd said, laughing. "I don't want to step on your dress." As the opening notes began to play, Dad appeared at my side with a smile that looked almost nervous. "Ready for this, sunshine?" "I've been ready for 30 years, I said, taking his offered hand. We walked to the center of the dance floor as our guests formed a circle around us. The photographer moved discreetly around the edges, capturing what should have been a tender moment between father and daughter. I felt beautiful and loved, surrounded by everyone who mattered to me, dancing with the man who'd taught me everything about loyalty and family. For the first few bars of the song, everything was perfect. Dad held me gently, his steps sure and familiar. We swayed together in comfortable silence, and I let myself sink into the moment. This was what I'd been working toward, not just the wedding, but this feeling of completion, of having honored my family and earned my place in it. Then Dad leaned in close, his breath warm against my ear, and whispered the words that would shatter everything. "Thanks for paying my debts," Dad murmured, his voice low and intimate, meant only for me. "The house is your sister's now." The world stopped. The music continued playing, couples continued swaying around us, guests continued smiling and taking photos, but for me, everything went silent except for the roaring in my ears. I pulled back to look at his face, searching for some sign that I'd misheard, that this was some kind of terrible joke. But his expression was calm, almost relieved, like he'd just delivered good news. "What?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. He pulled me closer, his grip tightening on my hand and back as if he sensed I might try to pull away. "You're a good girl, Elara. You've always been so responsible, so reliable. Now that you're married off, you have a husband to take care of you. Chloe needs a place to stay for her residency. She's moving in next week. The house is hers." Each word hit me like a physical blow. Married off. Like I was livestock being transferred from one owner to another. Like the 5 years I'd spent sacrificing everything to save that house meant nothing now that I had a husband to take care of me. Like the $120,000 I'd paid, the dreams I'd deferred, the life I'd put on hold, none of it mattered because I was no longer his financial responsibility. My warm, infectious smile, the one that had gotten me through every family crisis, every difficult client, every moment when I'd wanted to scream about the unfairness of it all, vanished completely. It didn't fade or falter. It simply disappeared, leaving my face a blank mask of shock. "I paid $120,000, I said, my voice still a whisper but gaining strength. "Every penny. We had an agreement, legal papers." "And I'm so grateful," Dad continued, still swaying to the music as if we were having a normal conversation. But circumstances change. Chloe needs stability right now to focus on her art. You understand, you've always understood what's best for the family. What's best for the family? The phrase that had governed my entire adult life, that had convinced me to give up my savings, my dreams, my security. What's best for the family, which apparently meant what's best for everyone except me. I stopped moving. Dad stumbled slightly as I went rigid in his arms, and a few people on the dance floor glanced our way. Mark was watching from the head table, his expression shifting from fond amusement to concern as he registered my body language. That's when I remembered the microphone. Jessica had insisted on it that morning. For the wedding video, she'd said, carefully clipping the tiny wireless mic to the inside of my dress bodice. This way we'll capture every word of your vows, every sweet moment. You'll want to remember everything. The mic was still there, still recording, still transmitting to the sound system that carried announcements and music throughout the barn. I could feel it against my ribs, a small weight that suddenly felt like the most powerful weapon in the world. Dad thought he could destroy me in private, deliver this devastating blow during what should have been our most intimate moment, then expect me to smile and pretend everything was fine for the rest of the evening. He thought I'd swallow this betrayal the way I'd swallowed every other disappointment, every other moment when my needs came last. He was wrong. A cold, diamond-hard determination settled in my chest. This man had just stolen my past, my present, and my future in a single breath. He'd used my love against me, weaponized my loyalty, and discarded me the moment I was no longer useful to him. But I had something he didn't know about. I had the truth, and I had a way to share it with everyone who mattered. I took a half step back, creating space between us. The movement was small but deliberate, and I saw confusion flicker across Dad's face as he realized something had shifted. For everyone wondering what my father just whispered to me during our father-daughter dance, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the barn's sound system, I'd like to share. The effect was immediate and devastating. The background chatter died instantly, replaced by a silence so complete I could hear the rustle of fabric as 150 guests turned to stare at us. The other couples on the dance floor stopped moving, frozen in place like we were all part of some surreal tableau. Dad's face went white, then red, then white again. Elara, honey, let's not. Thanks for paying my debts, I said, my voice steady and clear as I repeated his exact words. The house is your sister's now. You're a good girl. Now that you're married off, your sister is moving in. The house is hers. A collective gasp swept through the room. I heard someone's champagne glass hit the floor and shatter. At the head table, Mark's chair scraped back as he stood up, his face a mask of fury. Jessica's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock and understanding. But it was Chloe's reaction that confirmed everything I needed to know. She was sitting at a table near the front with some of our cousins, and when my words hit the air, her face crumpled with guilt rather than surprise. She'd known. Of course she'd known. Elara, please, Dad hissed, his grip on my hand tightening painfully. This isn't the time or place. When would be the time? I asked, and my voice carried that question to every corner of the barn. When would be the appropriate time to tell me that the house I've been paying for, the house I've sacrificed everything for, is being given to someone else? When would be the right moment to learn that 5 years of my life meant nothing? The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. I could see phones coming out, people starting to record. This would be everywhere by morning, the bride who exposed her father's betrayal during their dance, the wedding that became a reckoning. I didn't care. Let them record it. Let them share it. Let the whole world see what happened when you took someone's loyalty for granted. $120,000, I continued, my eyes locked on Dad's increasingly desperate face. That's what I've paid over the last 5 years. Every penny of your debt, plus interest, plus legal fees. I lived in a studio apartment smaller than most people's closets. I drove a car with 200,000 miles on it until it literally died. I worked 60-hour weeks and took on freelance clients every weekend. My voice grew stronger with each word, 5 years of suppressed anger finally finding its voice. I said no to my college friend's reunion trip to Europe. I said no to vacations, to dinners out, to every small pleasure that might have made those years bearable. I delayed starting a family because we couldn't afford a bigger place while I was paying your debts. Mark was moving through the crowd now, pushing past guests to reach me. His face was thunderous, and I could see him struggling to contain his rage. "And for what?" I asked, my voice rising slightly. "So my sister could have a free place to live while she pursues her art, so I could be married off and become my husband's responsibility instead of yours." "That's not," Dad started, but I cut him off. "The legal papers say the house transfers to me when the debt is paid. I have those papers, Dad. I have the receipts for every payment I made. I have the bank records showing every sacrifice I made to keep your promise." The silence stretched on, broken only by the sound of someone crying quietly. I thought it might be Mom, but I didn't turn to look. I kept my eyes on Dad, watching him realize that there was no way to spin this, no way to make himself look like anything other than what he was, a man who had betrayed his daughter's trust in the cruelest possible way. From the crowd, I heard a voice call out, "That's theft." Someone else shouted, "You can't do that to her." A few people started clapping, slow and deliberate, building into applause that echoed through the barn. "The agreement was that you'd have the house when you needed it," Dad said finally, his voice weak and defensive. "But you're married now, you don't need." "I don't need the thing I paid for," I interrupted. "I don't need the investment I made. I don't need the home I was promised. I don't need the security I sacrificed everything to earn." Mark reached us then, and I felt his hand on my back, warm and steady and furious. "Elara," he said quietly, "we're leaving." I looked at him, this man who'd stood by me through 5 years of sacrifice, who'd never once complained about our modest dates or delayed engagement. His dark eyes were blazing with protective anger, and I realized that he was just as betrayed as I was. He'd been planning our future in that house too. "Yes," I said, my voice carrying one last time through the sound system. "We are." I let my hand drop from Dad's as if it were contaminated. The gesture was small but unmistakable. I was done with him, done with this family that saw me as a resource to be used rather than a person to be valued. Then I turned my back on him and walked away. I didn't run. I didn't stumble or rush or let emotion make me clumsy. I walked with the measured, deliberate pace of someone who had just made the most important decision of her life. My ivory silk dress flowed around me like water, the wildflowers in my light brown bohemian braid catching the light from the string lights overhead. Behind me, I could hear the explosion of voices as 150 people tried to process what they'd just witnessed. I heard Dad calling my name, his voice cracking with desperation. I heard Mom crying and relatives arguing, and someone, probably Jessica, telling people to give me space. But I didn't turn around. I walked past the head table where our untouched wedding cake sat waiting to be cut, a 3-tier vanilla and raspberry creation we'd chosen because it reminded us of summer picnics in the Victorians' backyard. I walked past the gift table loaded with presents we'd registered for, thinking we'd be setting up house together in the home I'd earned. I walked past the photo booth where guests had been taking silly pictures all evening, and out the barn's main doors into the cool night air. The contrast was immediate and shocking. Inside, chaos and noise and the ruins of my family relationships. Outside, silence and stars and the clean smell of autumn air. Mark was right behind me, his hand finding mine the moment we cleared the doorway. "I've got you," he said, his voice fierce with loyalty and love. "We don't need them. We don't need that house. We'll build our own." I stopped walking and turned to face him. His hair was slightly mussed from pushing through the crowd, his tie loosened, but his eyes were steady and sure. This man had just watched his new wife's family implode on their wedding day, and his first instinct was to protect me, to reassure me, to make sure I knew I wasn't alone. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. "I'm sorry your wedding day got ruined. I'm sorry you married into this mess." Mark's hands came up to frame my face, his thumbs brushing away tears I didn't realize I'd been crying. "You didn't ruin anything," he said firmly. "You stood up for yourself. You refused to let them use you anymore. I've never been prouder to call you my wife." The word wife hit me like a revelation. I was married. Despite everything that had just happened, despite the betrayal and the public confrontation and the family relationships that might never recover, I was married to this incredible man who saw my worth even when my own father didn't. As we stood there in the quiet night air, my phone started buzzing with notifications. Text messages, social media alerts, missed calls. The video was already spreading, shared by guests who'd captured the moment on their phones. I could see the hashtags forming in my mind: wedding betrayal, father-daughter dance, mic drop. "What do we do now?" I asked. Mark smiled, and it was the first genuine smile I'd seen since Dad started talking about Chloe's residency. "Now we go on our honeymoon. We spend 2 weeks in Ireland like we planned, and we come back and start our life together. In our own place, that we choose together, that no one can take away from us." I nodded, feeling something loosening in my chest. The grief was there, grief for the family I'd thought I had, for the father I'd believed in, for the 5 years I'd never get back. But underneath, it was something I hadn't felt in a long time: freedom. "I want to go," I said. "I want to leave right now." "Our bags are already in the car," Mark said, pulling out his phone. "I'll call the hotel and tell them we're checking out early. We can drive to the airport tonight and see if we can get on an earlier flight." As he made the call, I looked back at the barn one last time. Light spilled from the windows, and I could see silhouettes of people still inside, probably trying to make sense of what had just happened. My family, my friends, my wedding guests, all dealing with the aftermath of a truth that had been 5 years in the making. I felt a moment of regret, not for what I'd done, but for what I'd lost. The family I'd thought I belonged to, the father I'd believed loved me unconditionally, the sister I'd protected and supported, all of it had been an illusion, built on my willingness to sacrifice myself for their comfort. But illusions, once shattered, couldn't be rebuilt. And maybe that was okay. Maybe it was time to stop trying to earn love from people who saw me as a resource rather than a daughter. Maybe it was time to build something real with someone who valued me for who I was, not what I could provide. "Flights confirmed," Mark said, ending his call. "We can be in Dublin by tomorrow afternoon." I smiled, and this time it felt real. Not the warm, infectious smile I'd used to smooth over family problems and make everyone else comfortable, but something smaller and more honest. Something that belonged entirely to me. "Let's go home," I said, and I meant Ireland. I meant our hotel room tonight and our new apartment when we got back. I meant anywhere that Mark and I were together, building something that couldn't be taken away by a whispered betrayal on a dance floor. We walked to our car hand in hand, leaving behind the wreckage of my old life and stepping into the uncertain but honest future of our new one. Behind us, the barn glowed with warm light, but we didn't look back. We had better things to build. 3 weeks later, we were back from Ireland, tanned and rested and ready to start fresh. The honeymoon had been exactly what we needed: time to process what had happened, to grieve what we'd lost, and to plan what came next. We'd spent long mornings in bed talking through our feelings, afternoons exploring Dublin and the countryside, and evenings making lists of what we wanted in our new life together. The fallout from the wedding had been swift and decisive. The video of my confrontation with Dad had indeed gone viral, shared thousands of times across social media, with captions like, "Bride exposes father's betrayal during wedding dance," and "This is why you don't mess with wedding mics." The #wedding mic drop had trended for 3 days. Most of the comments were supportive, with people sharing their own stories of family financial manipulation and praising me for standing up for myself. But the real consequences were closer to home. Jessica had kept me updated via text while we were away. Dad had tried to do damage control, claiming I'd misunderstood his words, that he'd never intended to go back on our agreement. But too many people had heard exactly what he said, and the legal papers I'd mentioned were real and documented. Chloe had moved out of the Victorian house within a week, apparently unable to handle the guilt and public scrutiny. She'd sent me a long, rambling text message that was equal parts apology and justification, explaining that she'd never asked for the house, but had assumed I'd understand that her art was more important than my investment. I deleted the message without responding. Some bridges, once burned, weren't worth rebuilding. Mom had called twice, both times to beg me to work things out with your father. She couldn't seem to understand that there was nothing to work out. Trust, once broken so completely, couldn't be repaired with apologies or explanations. The house sat empty now, a monument to promises broken and loyalty betrayed. Dad couldn't legally give it to Chloe without my consent, and I had no intention of giving that. But I also had no desire to live there anymore. The Victorian on Elm Street, once my dream home, now felt tainted by everything that had happened. Instead, Mark and I found a small craftsman bungalow on the other side of town. It needed work, new paint, updated fixtures, a kitchen renovation, but it was ours. Completely, legally, unquestionably ours. We'd used the remainder of my savings as a down payment and taken out a mortgage we could easily afford on our combined salaries. "It's perfect," I said as we stood in the empty living room on move-in day, sunlight streaming through windows that needed new treatments. "It's going to be perfect," Mark corrected, wrapping his arms around me from behind, "once we make it ours." That distinction mattered. This house wasn't perfect yet, but it would be because we'd make it that way together. No one could take it from us, no one could hold it over our heads, and no one could use it to manipulate our choices. I'd gone back to work the Monday after we returned, bracing myself for awkward conversations and pitying looks. Instead, I'd found something unexpected: respect. My colleagues, many of whom had heard about the wedding through social media or mutual friends, seemed to see me differently. Not as the pushover who'd let her family walk all over her, but as someone who'd finally stood up for herself. "Good for you," my boss had said simply, when I'd apologized for any embarrassment the viral video might have caused the firm. "Family or not, nobody should treat you that way." 2 of my biggest clients had actually reached out to increase their contracts, saying they respected someone who stood by their principles even when it was difficult. One had even joked that if I could handle family drama that publicly, I could definitely handle their books. The legal situation with the house was still ongoing. My lawyer had assured me that the agreement was ironclad. Dad couldn't transfer the property to anyone else without my written consent, and I had every right to demand he honor our original deal. But I'd surprised everyone, including myself, by instructing him to negotiate a different arrangement. I wanted Dad to sell the house and use the proceeds to pay me back the $120,000 I'd given him, plus interest and damages for breach of contract. I didn't want the house anymore, but I wanted my money. I wanted the financial security I'd sacrificed, the nest egg I'd given up, the independence I'd traded for a false promise of family loyalty. It would take time, houses don't sell overnight, and Dad would have to deal with the reality of his choices. But eventually, I'd get back what was mine, and he'd have to live with the consequences of betraying his daughter's trust. In the meantime, Mark and I were building something new. We painted walls together on weekends, shopped for furniture that reflected both our tastes, and slowly turned our little bungalow into a home. It was smaller than the Victorian would have been, and it didn't have the same history or character, but it had something more important: it was honest. Every room we furnished, every improvement we made, every decision we made about our space, it was all based on what we wanted, not what we owed to anyone else. For the first time in 5 years, I was living a life that belonged entirely to me. 6 months after the wedding, Jessica came over for dinner to see how we'd settled in. She walked through our little house, admiring the renovated kitchen and the garden we'd started in the backyard, and finally shook her head in amazement. "You're glowing," she said as we sat on our new patio with glasses of wine. "I mean, you look happier than I've seen you since college." I considered that, watching Mark through the window as he cleaned up from dinner. "I feel lighter," I said finally, "like I've been carrying this weight for so long that I forgot what it felt like to stand up straight." "Any regrets?" Jessica asked gently, "about how it all went down?" I thought about it honestly. Did I regret exposing Dad's betrayal so publicly? Did I regret walking out of my own wedding reception? Did I regret burning bridges with family members who might never forgive me? "No," I said, and I meant it. I regret that it took me so long to stand up for myself. I regret that I let them use me for 5 years. I regret that I thought being the good daughter meant accepting whatever scraps of respect they threw my way. I paused, watching the sun set over our little neighborhood, our little life, our little piece of independence. But I don't regret telling the truth. I don't regret refusing to be discarded the moment I was no longer useful. And I definitely don't regret walking away from people who saw my loyalty as weakness instead of strength. Jessica raised her glass, to new beginnings. To honest beginnings, I corrected, clinking my glass against hers. Later that night, as Mark and I got ready for bed in our own bedroom in our own house, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. My light brown hair was loose around my shoulders, my blue eyes were clear and calm, and my smile, when it came, was genuine and unforced. I looked like myself again. Not the responsible daughter, not the family fixer, not the woman who sacrificed everything for people who took her for granted. Just me, Elara, building a life based on love and honesty and mutual respect. It had taken a wedding day confrontation and a very public family breakdown to get here, but I'd finally learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself is to stop being good to people who don't deserve it. The house on Elm Street eventually sold, and I got my money back with interest and damages. Dad and I haven't spoken since the wedding, and I'm okay with that. Chloe sends a Christmas card each year, which I acknowledge but don't reciprocate. Mom still calls occasionally, usually to update me on family news I don't particularly want to hear. But Mark and I, we're thriving. We've turned our little bungalow into exactly the home we wanted, we've built careers we're proud of, and we've created a life based on partnership rather than obligation. Some people might say I lost my family that night on the dance floor. I prefer to think I found myself.
Elara, thank you for your raw honesty. Your story reveals how misplaced family loyalty can mask exploitation, teaching us to reclaim our worth before it's too late. It's a universal wake-up call about trusting instincts and building authentic bonds. I'm Eliza Quinn, and remember, here on Wedding Day Justice, veils off, justice on.